Yeah. And so I just said hi to her and we talked, and now we started talking about the job offer and all that. I'm like, oh, yeah.
All right, everybody. Welcome to ReForm Shreveport's first event featuring Chuck Marohn with the Strong Towns Organization. I want to give a little introduction real quick. My name is Tim Wright.
What are you
head
doing?
of this organization. And first, I want to give some thanks to some of our sponsors. First, I'd like to thank the Community Foundation for helping us funding to make this event happen. I'd like to thank Politician and them. Second, I'd like to thank the DDA and Liz Swain. She's here today. They helped a lot with putting this event together and getting the word out about it. I'd also like to thank Caddo Parish, Stephen Jackson, and Woody Wilson. They helped us put on this event as well. I'd like to thank Community Renewal International. They gave us a lot of help as well. I'd like to thank Heliopolis and Fusiform Design and Sport Train. They helped with various other things, including marketing for the event. And so with that, let me just introduce myself a little bit. My name is Tim Wright. I've been writing for the publication Heliopolis for since about the beginning of last year. I'm an engineer. I moved here about a year ago. And started writing for Heliopolis, found a voice writing about different civic issues, community development issues, and got together with a couple of my friends, namely Chris Lyon and Lynette Fuller, and we thought, what if we would get together and try and bring in some speakers that are leaders throughout the country about how we make strong cities, and we kind of formed around this idea of ReForm Shreveport. I live downtown. Live in an old building that's been put to residential use, and I just became fascinated with this idea of reforming Shreveport. And we've got all this stuff in Shreveport, and all it takes is a little bit of creativity to make it into something new. And I think that's the way forward. And so, with these events, I just hope to bring the community of Shreveport together and just learn a little bit. And so, with that, I'd like to welcome Chuck Marohn of Strong Towns.
I hate those things. They make you look like you're in a Tron movie or something. That's just not my style. We'll do it this way. Hey, everybody.
Hey.
I'm starting to get used to the Shreveport vibe, and it's much more conversational than from Minnesota, where I'm from. In Minnesota, I'll give you a quick story. I was speaking in North Dakota, right across the Minnesota border once. And I gave this talk, and at the end of the talk, I asked if anyone had any questions. And I knew they did, because there were a couple of burning issues in the community. And nobody spoke. And so I kind of asked myself a question and answered it, kind of trying to lighten up the crowd. Got to the end, and nobody spoke. And do you have no questions at all? So after doing this a couple times, I said, well, they must not have any questions. And I said, thanks everybody for coming. And everybody got up, and like 2 out of 3 people formed a single file line to ask me their question one-on-one. That's the way we do things up in Minnesota. A week later, I was speaking in Little Havana in Miami, and we were supposed to get started at 7, which for Minnesota, when we start at 7, that means you start at 6:59, 7 in the morning, right? And the event was supposed to start at 7. I showed up at 6:30. Make sure we were ready and everything. The person who owned the building didn't show up till like 10 after 7. And nobody started to trickle in till like 8 or a little after 8. We got started about 8:30. And instead of giving a talk, where I would share ideas and then at the end we would chat, it like after 2 minutes just became a big conversation amongst the whole room where I was kind of like one of the participants. It was cool. It was very cool. But it was like a huge, clash of cultural experiences for me. So I'm getting used to all of you. Go ahead and be yourself, and I'll be happy with that. My name is Chuck Marohn. I'm a civil engineer. I'm a land use planner. Those are 2 professions that you think would be very similar, but they're actually quite different in their background and training When I was in engineering school, we made jokes about planners, and when I was in planning school, we made jokes about engineers. They were both very funny. Sorry, dude, you got the wrong door. After a number of years of working as an engineer, I went back to school and got a planning degree and started working as a planner. And in both professions, I kept coming to this same, he's very insistent that he wants in that door, isn't he? Are we all going to ignore him? Okay, I'm with you. I will just ignore him as well. Sorry. No, there's a sign on that door right there. Yeah, no, I stood out there and did the same thing. Someone let me in. I kept coming back to this question. Why are cities struggling financially? Why, despite all the growth, despite all the job creation, despite all the incentives, despite all the things we do to generate wealth and prosperity in this country, do our cities struggle to do just basic things? Why can we find millions of dollars to run a bypass road around a city? A redundant bypass, but we can't keep the library open past 4:30. Why can we find millions of dollars to expand water and sewer miles out of town, but we can't find the money to paint a crosswalk or fix a sidewalk or keep firefighters and police officers employed? And so in 2008, I started to write, and that writing has grown into what is the Strong Towns movement. And just very briefly, our mission as an organization is to support a model of development that allows our cities, towns, and neighborhoods to grow financially strong and resilient. Tonight we're going to try to answer that question: why are cities struggling financially, and what can we do about it to make our cities stronger and more healthy? I want you to think about the way cities were built thousands of years ago. These are two artist renderings. The one on the left is an ancient city called in the Fertile Crescent, like 6000 BC. The one on the right is, of course, ancient Rome. When we think about the way these cities were built, they were built around the dominant transportation technology of the day, that, of course, being your 2 feet, right? People would walk everywhere they went. And so the spacing, the scale, the distance between different types of things you would do on a normal day, all this was based around a society of people who walked. And fast forward thousands of years, this is my hometown. I live in a little town called Brainerd, Minnesota. It's about 2.5 hours north of Minneapolis, St. Paul. This is what it looked like back in 1904. And people would arrive by stagecoach, they'd arrive by train, but once they got here, they would walk everywhere they went. And so the spacing, the scale, the distance between different types of things you would do on a normal day, all this was based around a society of people who walked. Beginning in the early 1900s and then accelerating after World War II, we began to build cities around a different transportation technology. We began to build cities around the automobile. We came up with different building types, different building styles, different ways of arranging things on the landscape. If we were to go out today and ask someone randomly off the street to explain this transition, they would more than likely talk about it in terms of progress. We used to be a society of people who walked everywhere, so we built cities around people who walked. Now we are a society of people who drive everywhere, so we build cities around people who drive. Someday we will have jet cars, and we will build cities around people with jet cars. And someday we will teleport, and our cities will look completely different than they do today. This is a narrative of progress. And it's very comforting to us because it puts us on this continuum of things continually getting better. There's another way to think about this, though, that isn't quite as comforting. And I want to put this idea in the back of your head as kind of a seed to grow throughout this conversation we're going to have tonight. When we look at ancient we have to step back and acknowledge that by the time you get to even this point here, humans had been experimenting with how to build cities for thousands of years. They had been trying different things. What worked, they would keep and expand upon. What didn't work, they would get rid of. And by get rid of, I mean people died, things went poorly, right? Those ideas weren't transmitted to the next generation because they just weren't around anymore. Right? By the time you get to ancient Rome, you have a style of building that had been honed and perfected by trial and error over thousands and thousands of years. And by the time you get to my hometown in the early 1900s, you have a style and a pattern and an approach to building that is essentially universal. All around the world, in different cultures, different continents, different latitudes, we see a very similar style of development. When we look at this style of development, even though for most of us, this is all we've ever known, right? This is what normal is. This is, as they said in my engineering days, this is the way things have always been done. It's important for us to understand that this is a very young experiment. We haven't been doing this very long at all. And the ideas to do this didn't come through trial and error. We didn't, try this out in Texas for a couple hundred years, see how things went, take the ideas and import them here. No, what did we do? In one generation, we transformed an entire continent along a new set of principles and ideas. Like I said, those principles didn't come from trial and error. Where'd they come from? Largely European intellectuals, think tanks, universities. These were great ideas that we had on how to fix persistent problems with cities. Hierarchical road networks, use-based zoning, modern finance. All of this came to bear in this massive, massive experiment. It is important for us to grasp that even though this feels very normal to us, it is actually a huge experiment. No society in all of human history has tried to transform an entire continent in one generation around a new set of ideas. And not only transform the living arrangements of an entire continent, but also the underlying economic, social, and cultural fabric of that continent in the process. What we're going to talk about today are some of the financial implications of this transition. Now, if we were to go back 100 years ago in Shreveport and say, we were going to grow jobs, we were going to have economic development, we were going to have growth, those things would be a byproduct of things we did locally. If we were going to have a job, it was going to be a job that one of us created. If we were going to have economic growth and development, it was going to happen because of things we did here locally. After the Great Depression, after World War II, those tasks became a responsibility that was shared between local governments and state and federal governments. So now today, when we want to experience growth at the local level, we use three primary mechanisms that we didn't really access 100 years ago. The first mechanism is transfer payments between governments. The idea that the state government, the federal government, as our partner in creating jobs and growth and economic opportunity, will come up with grant programs, subsidy programs, building programs, tax incentives. The second mechanism, transportation spending, the idea that we would pool our money together, use it to build highways, interchanges, frontage roads, bridges. These things create jobs. They also create a platform where we can experience growth later on. The third mechanism is debt. Public sector debt is an important part of the conversation, but even more important is private sector debt. The ability of individuals and businesses to get long-term loans at low rates with little money down, have those debt instruments sold off onto a secondary market, securitized, bought up by pension funds around the world. We use these mechanisms today at the local level to create growth, and of course the growth is really important to us because it gives us the money that we need to do the things that we need to do, right? This is kind of city administration 101. When you're growing, you're able to handle the problems that you face, you're able to have the money to go out and take care of the problems. And so we have this obsession with growth. How do we create growth so that we have the money to do the things we want to do? At the local level, there are some really powerful incentives at play. When we get a federal grant, when we get a state tax subsidy, when the transportation department comes in with a project, or when the private sector comes in with leveraged capital, we, as local taxpayers, as local governments, pay a very small portion of that transaction. Most of the cost is paid for by somebody else. We may have to upsize a pipe, we may have to have some staff time, we may have to share in the road, have a local match, but the bulk of what's being put in, from the homes and the businesses to all the infrastructure, is being paid for by someone else. We, however, get a substantial bump in taxes right away. Not only do we get the transaction fees, but we get all the revenue from this new development. This works out very well for us. The catch is that as part of these transactions, we And I say we, the local taxpayer, the city, the public, we agreed to take over the long-term responsibility to service and maintain all this stuff. We agree that we will provide police protection, fire protection, the valves, the meters, all that becomes our responsibility. We are, in a sense, exchanging a near-term advantage in cash for a long-term liability. If you think this through over multiple life cycles, in other words, you look back at ancient Rome and you say, you know, we want to be here for a long time. We plan to be here more than just one generation or two. We're building for a long, prosperous future. There's only one of two ways that this strategy makes any sense. Either growth is going to continue at ever-accelerating rates. In other words, we're always going to be able to generate a whole bunch more new growth. We can take that revenue and we can make good on all the promises we've made in the past. Or the pattern of development, the way we actually go about building and assembling our places, is going to generate for us more wealth and prosperity over the long term than it creates in cost. Is that the food truck imposing on our? It's okay. Who was the one knocking outside? That was you? I'm sorry. We just couldn't stop and let you in. You were very persistent though. I admired that. So we all know the first assumption is not true, right? I mean, it's not mathematically possible, but we've been through enough of this in our economy where we know we're not just going to grow exponentially forever, right? Unfortunately, this second assumption is also not true. And for a little bit of time here, I'm going to get a touch technical. I am an engineer, so I have to do a little bit of that. One of the things that we did early on at Strong Towns is we rejected what we have come to call the quantum theory of economic development. The quantum theory of economic development is kind of the theory that all economic development projects at the local level pretty much buy into today. And it goes something like this. We know this project makes no economic sense. We know this project makes no economic sense. And we know this project makes no economic sense. But the magic happens when you combine them all together. When you combine them all together, the economic outcome is just enormous. It's a system, right? So you can't measure one and expect to see any positive results. You just have to trust that the entire system works to the benefit of everyone. We said, okay, how's that theory working for you, right? It doesn't seem to be working. But how would we test it? Because it's almost like a religious belief that we have today in economic development circles. How would we test it? And we said, there has to be portions of our system that in and of themselves are, in a sense, profitable or, make up a really good investment. So, for example, this right here. This is a dead-end cul-de-sac. This is a dead-end cul-de-sac, residential homes. There's no through traffic. There's no commercial traffic. The only reason that this road exists at all is because of the homes along it. There's no other reason for it to exist. If the homes weren't there, no road. This was built in the mid-1990s. When it was built, the city paid half the cost of paving the road. We asked the question, okay, based on the amount of taxes that the city collects from the people who live on this road, the only people that benefit from this road in any way, how long will it take the city to recoup the half that they spent to build the road? The answer is 37 years. Now, the road won't last that long. And once it falls apart, it's 100% the city's responsibility to go out and fix. They won't be doing it with revenue from these property owners because these property owners are not paying enough to actually fix their own road. Here's another road. This is a closed loop system with a dead-end cul-de-sac. Again, no through traffic, no commercial traffic. This road was built in the early 1980s. The developer paid for all the costs of the road, the utilities, rolled those costs into people's mortgages. When people bought their home, they've been paying for those for decades. At the same time, they've been paying the taxes to maintain the road. This had completely fallen apart. The city went out to fix it. The cost was $354,000. We asked the question, based on the taxes the city collects from the people that live on this road, the only people that use it or benefit from it in any substantive way, how long will it take the city to recoup the amount of money they just spent to build it? The answer is 79 years. Now, the road won't last anywhere near that long. So we said, okay, what if the city wanted to, between now and the time the road fell apart, raise enough taxes from these property owners to actually fix and maintain their road? What would that mean? It would mean an immediate 46% increase in taxes, with annual increases of 3% over inflation every year for the next 25 years, with all that money going just to maintain the roadway. The sewer, the water, the storm sewer, vastly more expensive. Now, sometimes people say, okay, Chuck, we get it. We know we lose money on residential property. We make it up on commercial. Commercial is our cash cow. To which my first response is, all right, I don't know any corporation that loses money on 90% of what it does and tries to make it up on the last 10%. I don't know why an incorporated municipality would think that was a good business strategy. Nonetheless, we've kind of convinced ourselves that, if we just build it and they will come, if we just have enough commercial property, it doesn't matter what happens with our residential property. This is a business park. This is one of those build it and they will come kind of investments that cities love to do. This was built in the mid-1990s. It's got the wide industrial roads, all the utilities. Every single lot now is built upon. This entire park is full. And the city felt this was such a successful project, they want to build another one, the exact same thing on property they own right here. They're literally going to mirror this and build the same thing. We said, if we could build the same thing for the same price and get the same level of investment, would that be a good project? In today's dollars, it would cost $2.1 million to build. Today, there is $6.6 million of investment there being taxed by the city. Now, pause for a second. Of that $6.6 million, 4 of those lots are a church. 2 of the lots are a school bus maintenance facility. 1 of the lots is a county maintenance garage. 1 of the lots is a city maintenance garage. These are all very important facilities, right? We need churches, we need schools, we need maintenance buildings, but none of them pay any taxes to the city, okay? Of the remaining lots, the ones that theoretically would be taxpayers, every single one was either sold for $1 and or given a long-term tax subsidy in order to attract them to move into this park. For the sake of our analysis, we assumed that every single lot in the new business park would be built on within 12 months of the project being finished. And they would be built on by a full tax-paying, non-subsidized entity. And that every penny of new revenue would go to retiring that bond. If that were the case, it would still take the city almost 3 decades, 29 years, just to break even. That's 29 years where everybody else's taxes would have to go up to pay to mow the ditches, provide police protection, fire protection, and all the other services that would be needed. And this is in the most wildly optimistic scenario. Now, I used to go through and do about a dozen of these. I was very proud of the work we had done. If you're someone who likes case studies, I'll give you our website at the end and you can go there and read a whole bunch of these. I found I can make the point with just 3. Do more than 3 and people start to cry. It doesn't go well. Let me show you what's going on. And again, I apologize. I'm an engineer. I like charts. There are 4 charts in this presentation. The next 4 slides, I will walk you through them. This won't be painful. After that, if you hate charts, there will be no charts the rest of the day. Let's say that we have a piece of property. And a developer comes to us and says, I have this piece of property I would like to build upon. I am willing to, at my expense, build all the homes, build all the commercial buildings. I will follow all of your rules. I'm not asking for any variances. I'm not asking for any subsidies. I will, at my expense, pay for all the roads and the streets, the sidewalks, the curbs, the pipes, the pumps, the valves. I'll pay for all that. I'll follow all your standards. The only thing that I'm asking as this developer is that when I'm done building all this stuff in your city, that you, the city, the public, agree to take over the responsibility of serving and maintaining it. What would we say? You're shaking your head. We would say, yes.
We say yes a lot.
Yes. We would say, fantastic. You mean you're following all of our rules, you want no subsidies, You will pay for everything. This is the ideal scenario, right? But let's say, we're smart, prudent, thoughtful people. We've heard of this strong town stuff. We want to do the right thing. We know that we have this promise we've made that we got to now take care about in the future. So what we're going to do is when this money comes in, we're going to take the portion that would normally get siphoned off and spent fixing and maintaining stuff around the city, and we're just going to set that aside. And every year when the money comes in, we're going to set that portion aside, and we're going to allow it to accumulate so that when we get out a generation from now, and we have to make good on that promise that we made when we did this deal, we'll have a pot of money to do it. Here's what that looks like. In year one, everything is brand new. The money comes in, you take that portion, and you set it aside. In year two, more money comes in, and you add to what you had in year one. In year three, you add a little bit more, year four, year five, and you can see every year you're just adding money. Money's coming in, nothing's going out. A 5-year-old road isn't costing you anything. A 10-year-old sidewalk isn't costing you anything. A 15-year-old pipe doesn't cost you anything. And so you can see, you get a couple of decades out, and you've accumulated quite a bit of money. You're feeling very, very rich. This growth has worked out really well for you. The problem is, when we get to, in this example, year 25, and we have to make good on that promise we made way back 2 decades and a half ago, right? The cumulative amount of money we brought in is insufficient. And from a cash flow standpoint, we run far into the negative. Now, cities are not one development, right? Cities are a series of developments, a collection of neighborhoods. So let's say that our developer comes back in a couple of years after that first project. Because that worked out really well for you, that worked out really well for me. I've got a study that proves it, right? But how about we do a similar size project? And every other year from this point forward, a developer walks in the door with a similar size project. In other words, the ideal scenario for any city. Nice, steady, continuous growth. And we take that portion, we set it aside, we allow it to accumulate to the day that we have to make good on all these promises. Here's what that looks like. In year one, you've got your first development. It pays in the entire 25 years shown here. In year three, you add another. In year five, another. In year seven. And you can see that your cash starts to actually accelerate upwards. You're having all this growth. You're having growth upon growth upon growth. You're feeling incredibly wealthy. You have no expenses, just a nice steady stream of new growth. And when you get to year 25, and you have to make good on that promise you made way back in year one, yes, you've got to spend a little bit of money, but it's not a big deal, right? You've had all this growth. The growth creates what we call the illusion of wealth. Because as we all intuitively understand, if you lose money on every project you do, you don't make it up in volume. If you lose money over the long term on everything that you undertake, the further you go out in the time horizon, the more downward pressure there is on your budget. This is the answer to that original question. Why are cities struggling financially? Why, despite decades of growth, decades of investment, decades of prosperity, why can't we do just basic things? It's because we're living way out here in the time horizon, right? We're living way out here. We've accumulated lots and lots of liabilities. And while we've experienced growth along the way, it is impossible to generate enough growth now to keep everything going and to cover everything up. Now, let me ask you a couple really tough questions. Do you recognize yourself in this chart?
Yes.
We're having this insane election season, right? And if you listen to politicians, on this side, they've got explanations of why everything's screwed up, and this side, why everything's screwed up. And lots of blame being assigned. It's greedy corporations, it's lazy people, whatever it is. This is a human failing. This is why people smoke, right? I smoke, and then, I've got emphysema, right? This is why you will go home and have that bowl of ice cream and watch TV instead of going for a jog, right? This ice cream tastes good. I really like this TV show. Oh no, heart disease. Right? We are wired as humans to highly value pleasurable things today and deeply, deeply discount painful things in the future. This is a human failing that we all share. Let me ask you a second question now. What happened to the society thousands of years ago that developed and built an economic system based on exploiting this human weakness? What happened to the societies thousands of years ago that built and developed their society around this principle? Yeah, they went away. Their knowledge wasn't part of that, DNA that got passed on how to do things. Those ideas died. I have one more chart, and I'm sad to say it's a little more depressing than this one. After that, we'll be done with charts, but this one is a very important one to put this all in context, and this is a graph of debt. Everybody in this room knows about the conversation we're having at the federal level about our debt, right? Our national debt is enormous, 19 plus trillion dollars. Does anybody really fathom what $1 trillion is? It's an outstanding sum of money. When I was in the 4th grade, we had the weekly reader. You all had the weekly reader. I remember as a 4th grader, a little breakout box that said if you took the national debt and converted it into dollar bills and stacked them on top of each other, they would go to the moon and back like 23 times or something like that. Yeah, as if for a 4th grader, replacing one abstract concept with another abstract concept would provide some clarity, right? These are numbers beyond our ability to fathom. In this chart here, the bottom line, the blue line, that's the growth in our public sector debt. That's the growth in that extreme number. The black one, that's our GDP growth. This green one, the one that soars up like that, that's our private sector debt. That's debt that we share. That's home loans, commercial real estate loans, auto loans, credit cards, margin interest accounts, student loans, private sector debt. The way we financed the first generation of this new, exciting, experimental way to build a great, new, prosperous America was to use our savings and to reinvest that illusion of wealth back into creating more growth. When the liabilities started to pile up, when things started to slow down, when it became tougher to keep it all going, it took us a while to figure out what to do. But we eventually shifted from a model of growth through savings and investment to a model of growth through debt accumulation. And as we cross over into the 3rd generation of this experiment, we needed the growth so badly that we actually allowed our financial system to become predatory. We actually allowed our financial system to prey on our friends and neighbors. You can't afford a house? Well, now you can. You can afford a small house? Well, why don't you buy a large house? You can afford a large house? Well, here, buy multiple large homes. Our ability to extend this experiment by having our friends and neighbors take on accelerating levels of debt is simply not there. Obviously, there's some huge implications to all this. The mechanisms of growth that we become accustomed to are waning. The state government, the federal government do not have the money to prop up every failing city. Look at Detroit, right? They've not run in there to save them. They are vastly overcommitted. Our DOTs have functionally built more lane miles than they have any possible expectation of having the revenue to fix. We're talking, and we can talk about your situation here later, so let me not inject that into the conversation at this point. But around the country, there are crazy DOTs talking about adding more lane miles to their systems. Every DOT in the country over the next generation is going to be asking the hard question, what do we not maintain? How do we contract our systems? Where do we do that strategically to do the least amount of harm? Because they are vastly overcommitted. The private sector cannot continue to take on accelerating levels of debt. This means for us at the local level that we are going to be forced to absorb the cost of our development pattern. If we want that road fixed, we have to pay for it. If we want that pipe repaired, that money is going to have to come from us. This cannot be done in the current pattern of development without some incredibly large tax increases and or some devastatingly large cuts in services. Now, I wasn't invited here to tell you what you already know, right? Everybody here knows this is the debate we're having at every level of government everywhere. How big is the tax increase going to be? Who's going to pay for it? How deep is the service cut going to be? And where is that going to be felt? It is critical that we see the third variable in this sentence, the third variable being the current pattern of development. As long as we continue to build in an approach that is functionally insolvent, there is no way that our cities will avoid insolvency. As long as we continue to build in a style and a pattern that gives us an illusion of wealth today in exchange for enormous long-term liabilities, there's no way our cities will avoid default. Whether that is a hard default, like we see in places like Detroit and Stockton and San Bernardino, or whether it's a soft default, like we see in thousands of cities around this country, where we're laying off police and firefighters, we're closing libraries, shutting off streetlights, not maintaining parks, putting off critical maintenance, because we just don't have the money. Sound familiar?
Yeah.
We have to start having a conversation about how we build places that are financially more productive. So how do we do this? And years ago, I had to put this slide in because I would finish the presentation. The rest of the time, we're going to talk about how we think differently about things and how we can approach things differently. Now, we get to the end, and someone would always stand up and say, Chuck, I'm really angry at you. You came here and you scared the heck out of us, but you didn't give us the solution. What is the solution to these problems? And it took me a while to really understand what they were asking. Because what they were asking was slightly different than the words coming out of their mouth. What they were asking was really this: what can someone else change about what they're doing so that I don't have to change anything about what I'm doing?
That's right.
We've tried all of those solutions, right? We've tried all of those. At Strong Towns, we don't talk about solutions because really there are no solutions to these complex set of problems. We have created for ourselves an unsolvable set of problems. What we talk about at Strong Towns are rational responses. How do we, as smart, thoughtful, intelligent people, working together in a community, look at this complex set of problems we face, roll up our sleeves, and together respond as rational people? And when we get to rational responses, I always have to start with this photo here. Again, this is my hometown back in 1904. And when I first saw this photo, I was just blown away. Just amazing to me. The way the buildings line up, the way they frame the public realm at just the right Greco-Roman ratios. There's great segmentation of space. The buildings themselves have great symmetry. They front the public street in just the perfect way. This is an exquisitely designed street. Let me ask you some questions about these people here. How thick was their zoning code? How many boards and committees did you have to go to in this city to get an approval to build something? How many planners and engineers and economic development advisors do they have on staff? How much tax subsidy did they get out? How many state and federal grants did they receive? How many miles of pipe did they put in the ground to attract this development? How many shovel-ready sites and projects did they have? We can go through the litany of things that we have convinced ourselves today are absolutely essential to building successful places. These people had none of them. These were a bunch of illiterate lumberjacks in the middle of nowhere. They didn't even have 30-year mortgages. How did they do this? How did they do this? It is really simple. They copied what they knew worked. They took the materials they had on hand and they built in a pattern and a style that they had seen work around the world for thousands of years. After 70 years of all the growth and incentives and regulations, all the subsidies, all the programs, all the advice from engineers and planners and others on how to make cities prosperous and healthy, here's what this exact same street looks like today. That's the proper reaction. Yeah. It is a wasteland of half-occupied buildings and parking lots. And if you want to see in one snapshot why American cities are struggling so much today. Understand, there's $500,000 of public infrastructure in that little stretch of street there. Where is the wealth that is going to take care of that generation after generation? I was giving a lecture at a university in Boise, Idaho, and I got to this slide, and a student raised their hand, stood up and said, Chuck, I'm from Costa Rica. Costa Rica is a very poor country. We can't afford to build the way that you build. When we build, we have to build one block at a time. And before we can build the next block, we have to make sure that every gap in the block we just built is filled in. Otherwise, we won't be able to afford it. We are a very poor country. We can't afford to build this way. But we're a very poor country now, too. And we can't afford to build this way either. And for a long period of time, that illusion of wealth made us think that this kind of thing didn't matter. That we could walk away from blocks, we could walk away from buildings, we could walk away from whole neighborhoods. And we were so rich and so wealthy that it didn't matter. It matters big time. We're going to talk now about how we start to change our notions of how we grow so that we're making good investments and getting places back on their feet again. The first thing we have to do is deal with some of our worst habits. Build it and they will come is a fantastic movie plot. It is a terrible economic development strategy. We are in what we at Strong Towns call the desperation phase of the suburban experiment. If you want to be taken seriously as a local government in the economic development game, if you want to be a player in this game, what do you got to do? You got to have shovel-ready sites. You got to have shovel-ready projects. You have to spend millions of dollars preparing the ground in case Google should come trolling through town. You got to have a team of experts ready to hand out subsidies to whoever should need them, to make the difference. This isn't how cities build wealth. We all know this, right? This isn't how cities have ever built wealth. I'm going to show you now the very simple way that cities build wealth. Do any of you recognize this city here? Does it look familiar to any of you? It's interesting because I was in Portland earlier this week, and a bunch of people yelled out, Portland! Portland, the trees are different than what you have down here. It's clearly a northern city, right? But, Portland at one point in history looked just like that, right? So did Vancouver, so did San Francisco, Minneapolis, Chicago. They all looked like this at one point. The trees are wrong, but, Dallas, Houston looked like this at one point. New Orleans, Baton Rouge, Shreveport, all started out as a little collection of pop-up shacks, right? If we went back far enough, Manhattan began like this. You can keep going, London, Paris, Rome. This could be Romulus and Remus standing out here. Every city in all of human history that was started prior to our recent experiment started just like this. Some pop-up shacks, some hopes and some dreams. We built thousands of these across this continent, and for a variety of complex reasons that defy our ability to predict or project or even fully understand after the fact. A lot of these places failed. What happens when a place like this fails? Does the stock market crash? Does unemployment skyrocket? Do we have to have an emergency session of Congress to bail out Wall Street banks? No. A few people lose a little bit of money, they salvage what they can, and they move on to the next place. These are little bets. We built thousands of these across this continent, and for a variety of complex reasons that defy our ability to predict or project or even to fully understand after the fact, a lot of these places were successful. And when they were successful, they would grow in a very simple way. They would grow incrementally up, incrementally out, and become incrementally more intense. And so this, my hometown in 1870, after 30 years of growing incrementally up and incrementally out and becoming incrementally more intense, would become that exact same street I showed you earlier. And after another 40 years of growing incrementally up, incrementally out, and becoming incrementally more intense, these 2- and 3-story wood structures would be replaced by buildings of brick and granite. We don't build wealth by going to the casino and putting it all on red. The way we build wealth is by making small investments over a broad area, over a long period of time. Let me show you how powerful this style of development is. These are 2 identical blocks in my hometown. The one on the left I've labeled old and blighted. The one on the right I've labeled shiny and new. If you look at them, you'll see they're the same size, the same area, they have the same amount of public infrastructure, they're on the same thoroughfare, the same neighborhood. Everything about them is the same except for the style of development that's on them. That old and blighted block looks like this. As my city was growing out in the 1920s, the next increment of out were these 3 blocks. What you are looking at is the cheapest commercial building that you have been able to build in the 1920s. And had things proceeded as they had for thousands of years, what would we have expected to happen? They would have, over time, gotten 2nd and 3rd stories, become more ornate, more intense. And of course, that's not what happened. After these were built, we had the Depression, we had World War II, and we started our experiment, and we just skipped right over this and started building out on the edge. These buildings have stagnated for 90 years. 2 blocks over look the exact same. The city labeled it blight, had it torn down, and now we have the new drive-through taco joint. Everybody was thrilled about this, right? The planner was thrilled because we got rid of blight, we got rid of non-conforming. Now this fully meets our code. It's got plenty of parking, plenty of green space. The sign meets the sign code. It's got the right floor area ratios. Our engineer was happy because we got rid of that terrible on-street parking. Now the traffic flows more smoothly. The environmental people were happy. They only got some green space, but they convinced them to put native plants in the stormwater area. And the bike walk people were happy because they got a sidewalk, right? The sidewalk ends right there, but they got, Here's what nobody bothered to look at. That old and blighted rundown block has a total value of $1.1 million. When this was built, this shiny new taco joint, the same size area, the same amount of public infrastructure, had a total value of only $800,000. The city is actually collecting 42% more taxes from this old rundown junkie block than this stuff. Understand what you're looking at. You are looking at the traditional pattern of development, the way we built cities around the world for thousands and thousands of years. You're looking at it in its infancy after 90 years of neglect, and it still outperforms by a wide, wide margin the stuff we build brand new today. And everybody here knows the trajectory of the taco joint, right? We've all been around long enough to see what happens to buildings like this, right? 20 years from now, there'll be a new taco joint up the road. This one will be a used car lot. 10 years later, it will be boarded up. We'll be trying to get a grant to get it torn down, right? In fact, in the years, the 3 years since this has been built, here's what has happened to the property values on these sites. This is what we do in the middle of our cities. Here's what we do on the edge of our cities. This is our big box store. This is a 19-acre Mills Fleet Farm site. Mills Fleet Farm, double-sized big box, auto dealership, gas station. You guys don't have Mills Fleet Farm here. Mills Fleet Farm, Midwestern big box store. Wildly successful. When you walk in, you have auto parts, animal feed, lumber, guns and ammo, camouflage lingerie. That's the product mix. They're wildly successful in the Midwest. We love them. We have the biggest one in the world, because Brainerd is the home of Mills Fleet Farm. This is our 19-acre, the most expensive piece of property in the entire area. When the Mills people show up at a meeting, we just stop the meeting and say, what can we do for you? What do you need? Here's 19 acres of our rundown downtown. If you've seen the movie Fargo, you've seen a not so flattering but not so inaccurate portrayal of my hometown. Most of the second and third stories are unoccupied. First stories really struggle mightily. We've had no new buildings in my entire life. Plenty that have been torn down or have burned down and become parking lots now. So this is not a great place. It's kind of hurting. When we look out on the edge of town at this 19 acres, we see a total value of $0.6 million an acre. Huge sum of money. Yet, when we go look at this 19 acres in the downtown, what we see is that it has a value of 78% higher. The city is collecting 78% more property taxes from the people down here. And when it gets to retail taxes, even though this is a regional draw and this is a neighborhood draw, they're about equivalent. How much money did we spend to get that Mill Street Farm site? Well, we spent almost a couple $100 million on the bypass. We spent millions more on frontage roads, backage roads. When I was an engineer, I actually designed this one. That was $2.6 million. It was $10 million to get the sewer out to here, another 10 for the water. How much did my generation spend to get this wealth here? Nothing, right? Those were investments that my great-great-grandparents and their contemporaries made, slowly and incrementally. And then bequeathed to us as kind of an endowment for the community that would pay off generation after generation. We've kind of slowly milked it down. What happens when Mills Fleet Farm goes out of business? It will happen at some point, right? I mean, they won't be here forever. At some point, that will not be the use of this property. What happens when this gets boarded up and this gets boarded up and that? What happens? I don't know. But what we do know is that it will be far lower on the economic food chain than what it is now, right? Whatever comes next is going to be a lower value building. This is the peak, right? You're looking at the all-time high right here. There are 134 different properties in this 19 acres. What happens when one of them loses a tenant? Someone goes out of business, someone retires. What happens when, in our infinite wisdom, our planners are shown to be fallible, and we realize that we've zoned too much office space and not enough retail space, or too much retail and not enough residential? But these buildings are really, really flexible. They can become many different things. They can adapt and change over time. They can adapt to meet our needs, meet changes in technology. There's a reason why our ancestors, and I say that in the broadest possible sense of the word, why our ancestors built in this style. Not only is it way more productive financially, does it build way more wealth, but it is adaptable and resilient, where that approach is financially not very productive and quite fragile. This is what we see in the micro. I'm going to step back and show you the macro now. This is what happens on a wide scale. We see the same exact trends. What I'm going to show you right now is some modeling that's been done by a good friend of mine named Joe Minicozy. Joe goes out and models in the third dimension, value per acre. If you think of a farmer going out and spreading seed across the field, the parts of the field that grow up the most robustly, we can say that's the most productive parts of the field. So what Joe is showing you is where's the most financially productive parts of your city. I'm going to start with Buffalo, New York. If you've not been to Buffalo, New York, Buffalo, New York is hollowed out. After World War II, they ran the highways through the middle of the city. They ran the highways through the middle of the neighborhoods. They ripped down buildings to build parking ramps. They basically gutted their city out. They have lost population every census since 1940. It's been just one steady decline. Yet when we look at the city of Buffalo and we say, where is the wealth? Can you point to where their traditional downtown is? And not only does it outperform everything around it by a wide, wide, wide margin, it is just this massive repository of value. We see this in cities of all sizes. These guys have modeled thousands of cities across the country. We see the same thing every time. Here's a city of about 60,000 in upstate New York. We see the same exact pattern. We've got that historic downtown, that walkable type neighborhood, the stuff that was built incrementally, it vastly outperforms. Here's a little city near where I live of 1,200. When I first went to this town, they said, Chuck, we've got some really great stuff going on out here. We've got some really great stuff going on out here, but these neighborhoods are terrible. We've got to figure out how to get them torn down and get something decent built. And then we show them where all their wealth is. in those poor neighborhoods. The neighborhoods where all the poor people live. We did a study in Lafayette, one of your cities. When I say Lafayette around the country, and they say Lafayette, I'm sorry, I've tried to say that. I will try for you to say Lafayette, but I can't do it. I grew up with Lafayette, and can you forgive me just for that tonight? Okay. What's that? It's correct. So I'm saying it correct? I don't want to say I'm not claiming to be right. I'm claiming to be Minnesota, which is there's a very big difference there. When I go around the country, I say Lafayette. I have to explain it's Louisiana because there are other ones, which is why it's not Lafayette to me. So anyway, Lafayette. We did a study, and I don't know how many of you know Joey Durrell, the former mayor. They have a tradition in the city of when the mayor is term limited on their way out, that's when they raise taxes. That's when you can be magnanimous, like I'm on my way out, so now I'll raise taxes, because you can't raise taxes any other time. Well, he was under a lot of pressure by the chamber and others to raise taxes. And he actually brought me into his office. I sat down with him, and he said, I don't understand. I could raise taxes. I know I could. I could get it done. I'm a popular enough guy. I've made enough friends. I could get this done. But the amount I would raise taxes, the amount they're all pushing me to do, wouldn't cover even the tiniest gap of our backlog. It hardly gets us anything. And we're adding more to our backlog every year. Why are we going broke? Why? How do we solve this problem? And so what we did, Joe Minicozzi's team, and I was part of this, went in and said, okay, let's look at every single property in the city and ask how much revenue is being created by that property. How much money does the city get for that property? And then say, how much does it cost the city to provide service to that property? And let's map that out. And so this is the result of that. Now, I have to apologize. I was ignorant and did not realize that being red-green colorblind is a thing. Like 1 out of 40 people are red-green colorblind. So there's probably like 2 of you in this room who do not see red and green, to which this map does not have any distinguishing characteristics to you. For those of you that can see red and green, everywhere where you have green is where the city is bringing in more money than they're spending, and everywhere where you see red is the opposite, where they're going to spend more money to fix and service and maintain than they're going to bring in. For everybody now, those who can see red and green and those who can't, I will walk you through this map. So right here, we have a tall green spike that goes up. That spike is a new urbanist development called River Ranch. River Ranch, when I say new urbanist, I mean it is a development built traditional building styles with modern building financing. So tight streets, tight homes, but everything built all at once to a finished state. 30 years from now, everybody's roof is going to fail at the same time. Everybody's sidewalk is going to fail at the same time. Everybody's appliances will fail at the same time. So it's going to be interesting to see if over time that neighborhood can renew itself as it starts into decline. Right now, it's doing incredibly well. This is downtown Lafayette. It also is green by quite a wide amount. This is green. Now, I'm in a part of the country where many of you have probably been to this downtown. Would you trade downtowns with it? No. Not even close, right? Not even remotely close, right? They're downtown, college town. There's some dive bars, some restaurants. It's got a little bit of retail. They're trying, but this is by no. You don't get people coming to this city, going to downtown and snapping photos and putting them on postcards, right? It's struggling. There's a crescent of green that runs from here through this area here. There's a crescent of green. What are those areas? That's where the poor people live. Those are the poor neighborhoods. Those are the neighborhoods when we went there and we're going to get an Airbnb for a week. The city said, staff told us, don't go over to that neighborhood. That's where the burglaries happen. the homicides happen. Don't go there. Those are the poor neighborhoods. Out here, up top, down here, this is all red. Red. What's out there? The big box stores, the mall, the strip malls, the drive-through restaurants, the housing on the cul-de-sac with the 2 or 3 car attached garage. That's what's out here in red. There are 2 subsidies in this map. And they are subsidies that are universal to the American development experience. Subsidy number 1. The poor neighborhoods subsidize the affluent neighborhoods. That is a universal thing we see everywhere across this country when we do modeling. Subsidy number 2, future generations subsidize today's generation. And we say that because a lot of this map represents stuff that's brand new. A lot of these costs have not come to bear yet. This stuff is brand new. The city's not had to go out and do anything on it. So they're costs like in the ledger, but not yet realized, right? So at some point in the future, the residents of this city are going to have to go out and make some really hard choices on what they're not going to fix. Today, the typical family in Lafayette pays $1,500 a year in taxes to the city. In order to make good on every promise represented in this map, taxes would need to go from $1,500 a year to $9,200 a year. That will never, ever, ever happen. It won't even come close to happening. And so in the future, the residents of the city are going to have to decide what they don't fix. Now there's a model for this that we're all slightly familiar with, right? That model's called Detroit. And when I bring up Detroit, it automatically, everybody has in their brain a story about what happened in Detroit, right? Everybody, you can bring up Detroit and say, tell me what happened. Well, it's corrupt politicians. It's greedy auto companies. It's greedy unions. It's those people. It's whatever insane narrative you have. If you're far right or far left, you can explain Detroit. I will give you my explanation of Detroit. Detroit started this new experiment a couple decades ahead of everyone else. They did it more robustly than everybody else. And they arrived at the logical destination ahead of everybody else. We're all in the same boat. We're all this. And we're all going to have to make some really tough decisions about what stuff we take care of and what stuff we don't. When we look at these things, we can start to get an indication of things we can do differently. Here, these are from North Carolina. Here's a Kmart, $384,000 an acre. Here's a Walmart, $967,000 an acre. These were, highly sought after. They were very proud of these. They spent about $10 million putting in an interchange and running sewer and water out to these sites to get this. But yet, when we go to their downtown, here's a supper club, an old warehouse that they converted into a supper club, $5 million an acre. And my favorite, all time, Jimmy's Pizza, $3.4 million an acre. 10 times the productivity of Kmart, 4 times the productivity of Walmart. Let me ask you a question. When you step back and experience this city at 2 miles an hour instead of 45 miles an hour, what you realize is that we have nothing but space, right? There's just gaps everywhere. Your streetscapes are just full of gaps. They're full of buildings that are underutilized. They're full of streets and pipes and everything. And just have nothing but potential, raw underutilized capacity. So do you, the people of Shreveport, have the sophistication, have the moxie, have the ability to build something as inspired and refined as Jimmy's Pizza? Because if you do, if you can rise to that standard, and I think you can do a lot better, but if that's all you can do is rise to that standard, right? Look at the wealth you can start to build in your community. And we all understand the kind of opportunity that comes about in a building like that. and how that differs from the kind of opportunity we see in a building like this. When we're trying to create jobs, when we're trying to create wealth, when we look at and admire people who pull themselves up by their bootstraps and make something of themselves in an entrepreneurial way, we're talking about people like Jimmy, right? There's a saying from Silicon Valley that goes like this: innovation that happens from the top down tends to be orderly but dumb, while innovation that happens from the bottom up tends to be chaotic but smart. We all have a preference for smart over dumb. But as people in an affluent country, we have a huge, overwhelming preference for order over chaos. And if you doubt me, think of the last time you sat at a traffic signal at 1 in the morning. You will tolerate a lot of dumb in order to have order, right? Let me show you what this looks like from a city standpoint. This is Memphis, yeah? Memphis, Tennessee. I have been very fortunate to be invited to work with Memphis on a number of things. I think Memphis is a beautiful, beautiful, exciting place, full of very brilliant people. But Memphis has struggled, right? Memphis shows up on those statistics you don't want to be on. You know, along with Detroit, 1, 2, 2, 1, homicides, out-of-wedlock births, poverty rates. You see Memphis and Detroit up there all the time. Memphis did everything they were supposed to do after World War II to create growth and prosperity, right? They ran the highways through the middle of the city. They ripped down buildings to make that happen. They ripped down buildings to build parking lots and interchanges. They ran highways out through the middle of the neighborhoods. They ripped out their streetcar lines. They ran sewer and water out. They kept annexing property. They eventually built a beltway. They kept moving out further. They built a second beltway. They identified neighborhoods they thought were substandard. They kicked the people out and ripped them down. They subsidized businesses to move into Memphis. They subsidized businesses to stay in Memphis. And at one point, they decided that what they needed more than anything to create prosperity was an NBA basketball team playing in a pyramid-shaped stadium down on the Mississippi River. So they went and built a stadium and went searching for a basketball team. Now, those of you that don't know the story, Memphis was able to get a basketball team. They were able to get the Grizzlies from Vancouver to move to Memphis, and now you have the Memphis Grizzlies, and they're very proud of the Grizzlies. The problem is, when the Grizzlies came to town, they didn't like that stadium. So the city wound up building them a new stadium a few blocks away. This one sat empty for 15 years. After $200+ million of additional public subsidy from the state and the local government, this pyramid has now been repurposed as a Bass Pro Shop. Orderly but dumb. Okay? Let me show you chaotic but smart. This is also in Memphis, Tennessee. It's a little street called Broad Avenue. Broad Avenue was a streetcar stop. When the streetcar was ripped out, the highway ran right through the middle of the neighborhood. These 2 blocks just died. Without the foot traffic, without people able to go back and forth, there was no reason. So they were empty. Some neighborhood people, fed up with the decline, fed up with the neglect, went out and took matters into their own hands. They worked with the owners of the buildings to get them swept out. They swept up the sidewalks. They painted their own crosswalks. They painted their own bike lanes. They invited for one weekend businesses to come in and open up and just show people what this neighborhood could be. They had a little ice cream stand, a taco place. They had a clothier. They had a bike shop. They had an art gallery. They didn't go ask permission from the city. They didn't go get Department of Health inspections. They said, by the time anybody gets mad and comes to shut us down, we're going to be gone anyway. Let's just show people what this place could be like. And that's what they did. Now, this isn't the greatest block in Memphis, right? But it was a heck of a lot better than what it was before they started. I wasn't here for this project, but they brought me out here 6 months later. When I was out there 6 months later, every single storefront was occupied. I talked to one of the landlords of the building. He said he was able to charge double the amount of rent on the last place to go than he was on the first one. The city has gone out and documented 18 new businesses, 32 new jobs, $12 million of property value appreciation. Total public investment, 0. That's chaotic but smart. We were so inspired by Memphis in my hometown that we started a group called the Better Brainerd. And we went out in that neighborhood with that old and blighted block and that Taco John's, and we spent a whole year just humbling ourselves, asking, where are the people in this neighborhood struggling? And what are the things we can do to address that struggle? We didn't have a lot of money, but we had a lot of passion for what we were doing. So we saw the kids walking through the alley. Why are you guys walking through the alley on the way to school? Well, our mom told us that it's not safe to walk on the street, so we're supposed to walk here in the alley. Well, we went out and did a speed study, and yeah, the car's driving down the street. We're going way, way too fast. So we went out in the middle of the night, and we took chalk, and we narrowed up the lanes, and we said, we went out and did another speed study, and lo and behold, we lowered the speeds dramatically. We saw the mom walking through the ditch with the stroller, weeds up to her waist. What are you doing? Well, I have to get to the store today. I've got to get milk. I don't have a car. It doesn't feel safe walking on the street, so I'm walking here. We saw the elderly woman with the walker walking in the middle of the street, climbing over mounds of snow. What are you doing? I have to get to the pharmacy. I don't have a choice. I have to go today. The sidewalk's not shoveled, and so I'm walking out here. After a year of doing this, a year of talking to people and observing and trying to understand where people were struggling, we wrote this report called Neighborhoods First. It identified 8 projects the city could do in this neighborhood, 8 little things that the city could do to make this neighborhood a better place to live. The idea was if we can make it a better place to live for the people that are there today, more people will want to live there, the people that are there will want to invest in their own properties, and we can start that incremental upward cycle again of investment. 8 little projects, things like put in a bike lane here, put in a crosswalk here, plant a row of trees over there. My city right now is in the process of spending $14 million to run sewer and water 2 miles out of town to the airport, where we are going to build another business park. We already have a business park built in the 90s that's only half full, but this one would be air-oriented, which according to all the theories has some huge advantage. It's going to create all kinds of jobs for us. The total cost of our 8 projects, $16,700. What happens if we go out and spend $16,700 doing little improvements and nothing gets any better for anybody? Well, we're out $16,700 and we learned 8 things that don't work. Go back next year and try 8 other things, right? But I have a feeling that it will work. Yeah, I went to the city engineer and I said, I think you could use a sidewalk here. Do you know what his response was? Why would you say that, Chuck? He didn't know that. You know why he doesn't know that? Because he sits behind the desk, right? This is the thing. We have been so obsessed with trying to pick up the dollar out on the edge of town that we have overlooked the pennies, the nickels, and the dimes. They're just laying there in our neighborhoods waiting for us to pick up. And we have set up these processes where we go out and we ask people, what do you want, right? We go out and we say, let's have a public hearing. Let's have a survey. Let's bring people in and do sticker charts up on the walls. And you know what we really need to do? We need to humble ourselves to go out and ask, where are our people struggling? And what is the next smallest thing we can do to address that? And if we can do that every day, day after day, week after week, year after year, not only will we be making the highest possible returning investments that we can make, we will not be able to help but improve people's lives in the process. Thank you so much for having me tonight. Our website, strongtowns.org. I welcome you to go on there. I used to write a blog 3 days a week. Now we are publishing 3 or 4 times a day. We've got a podcast. We do a lot of video. We're trying to share this message with as many people as we can. All of our stuff is licensed under Creative Commons. And the idea there is that if there's anything that we have produced that will benefit you, please use it in any way that will make the world a better place. If you want to take something I have written, copy, paste it, cross off my name, and put yours on it, you're free to do that. That is perfectly acceptable. Strongtowns.org. If you like what we are doing and you want to support us, we ask you to do one thing, and that is to share this message with someone else. If you really, really like what we're doing, we're a member-driven organization. Almost half of our budget every year comes from members. We got some members here in the audience tonight. Thank you so much for being members. If you really, really want to support us, go to the website and become a member. Thank you, everybody.
All right, so now we're going to have a little break. We'll start a Q&A discussion at 7:30, and y'all are welcome to get on with the rest of your meeting elsewhere if you want to, or you can stick around with us to get some questions in. Just a few notes. There are bathrooms in the back, men to the right, women to the left. There's still some cookies and drinks out in the lobby if you'd like some. We've got a food truck out back. You're welcome to get some food. Smoking A's is out there. We at ReForm, we got a lot of donations from different organizations in the community. However, we still do have a little bit to make up. We're covering that with our own money at the moment, so if you'd like to contribute to this, and if it's something that you believe in, you can visit our fiscal sponsors website at communityrenewal.us/give.
Dig deep, brothers and sisters.
And you can help us out. You just have to note that it's for ReForm Shreveport, and they'll get that all sorted out. That information is also on the handout that has the schedule on it. And finally, we have our block tours event tomorrow at 10 a.m. at ArtSpace. We've acquired a Sport Tram bus, and we're going to get a little bus ride around the city and kind of see how all these principles that we talk about, how they look in real life. So we'd love to have you tomorrow for that. And so yeah, take a break, and we'll be back here in about 30 minutes. Thank you so much. Oh, one more thing. Yes, thank you so much to Strat for making their facility available for us. We really appreciate that. All right, thank you very much.
Comic book, the end of time. It was the same. I don't know.